Welcome to the Sci-Fi Show, where we talk science and philosophy with two of my favourite atheist thinkers, Alex Malpass and Dan Linford. How you doing, guys?
Good. How are you doing, Phil?
Yeah, I'm really good. I'm looking forward to my holidays, so I'm really good. We're trying to alternate in this series between tackling serious theists, we did last episode was Philip Goff, and less serious. And today is definitely the less serious. We're going to have some fun, I think. We're going to review the arguments of the Christian astrophysicist Hugh Ross. Now, a lot of Christians, I think they're quite impressed by Hugh Ross's credentials. He does have a PhD in astrophysics. He was at Caltech. But guys, would it be unfair to describe him as a crackpot?
Yeah, batshit crazy, I think would be my term.
Yeah.
I mean, usually I try to find something of intellectual substance in whatever we watch. And I try to be charitable to the people whose work we review, but this is beyond what we've looked at before.
Yeah, even worse than like John Lennox. I mean, the gap between like his perceived credibility and what I hope we will expose as his actual and rigor, we will see a huge gap. And of course, none can be displayed better than his argument for demons. And this was very popular on the Capturing Christianity channel. So let's have a look at his argument.
What convinces you that demons are real? Is it primarily the Bible, or are some of these personal encounters that you've experienced? Is that the main source of?
The Bible is a primary source, because I can use science to demonstrate that the Bible is inspired and inerrant. So I trust what it's got to say on these matters where I don't have the scientific tools. I do have a number of personal experiences, and I know a lot of people in my church and in my travels around the world, especially what I experienced in the Soviet Union, that persuades me, hey, there's actual evidence that we got here beyond what the Bible speaks about. But
would you mind articulating those experiences for me, if you're able to?
Yeah, I can do that. I remember speaking in a lecture hall in the Soviet Union. About a quarter of the people in the audience, the moment I walked into the room, they began screaming and yelling at me and screaming and claiming that Jesus was guilty of vile sexual immorality. Now, I've run into people who take the Lord's name in vain, but typically they stop at accusing Jesus of a grossly immoral behavior. But these individuals didn't do that. Moreover, they were yelling and screaming at the top of their lungs, preventing me even to speak. And what I noticed is the other people in the audience basically said, oh, they're all demon-possessed. That's what's going on here. And I said, well, let me come back tomorrow. So I came back the next day, but I brought another scientist with me who was a follower of Jesus Christ. I said, I just want you to be at the back of the room and just pray that God would silence the demons from interrupting and speaking. So we did that, and these people, and we're talking, like 60 of them, they were completely quiet throughout the whole of the lecture. And these other people in the audience, these physicists, were saying, we've never seen this happen. They're always yelling and screaming, and now they're quiet. And so that's when they became believers that, hey, there's something more powerful than the forces within these individuals. And I've seen experiences in the area where I live, near Pasadena, California. I remember walking out of Caltech one day, and this woman, a good 150 feet away, started screaming and yelling at me. And the moment I looked at her, she collapsed and went into the fetal position and started shaking and yelling. And then she began screaming obscenities. And I could tell she was terrified. And that terror reigned within her until I walked away. And this is well documented in demonic literature, that these are some of the classic symptoms of somebody who's demon-possessed, quite similar to what you read in the New Testament Gospels when Jesus encountered demons. I remember going into a witchcraft coven, and this guy who was the warlock in the coven said, you think you know the Bible? Give me any verse in the Bible, and I got it memorized. In fact, I got it memorized forward and backwards. So I said, you know what? I believe you. But tell you what, pick a verse out of the Bible and explain its meaning to me. He couldn't do it. He had it memorized, but he couldn't explain the meaning of any verse in the Bible. But he demonstrated supernatural powers right in front of me. He says, look out the window. See that girl there? I can make her do a cartwheel at my command. And so there's a lady in the room who says, do it now. He did, and she started spinning a cartwheel, and he said, stop. She stopped. So you could clearly see he had some supernatural powers that were enabling to do this. But I knew that what the powers he was getting were not from the righteous angels, because he had enslaved about a 10 to 12 women in that home as his sexual slaves. And they're all terrified of him. But yeah, we were able to rescue those women.
Okay, Alex, how familiar are you with the demonic literature?
I'm not very familiar with the demonic literature. I don't waste my time reading bullshit that doesn't mean anything. This was just bonkers. This is the most weird clip we've watched together. I don't even know where to start. I mean, okay, so I guess let's talk about the theatre dreamscape that he comes up with. It sounds surreal. It sounds like, when you try and describe a dream to somebody, I was here and then and then I was talking to a different person, and then they turned into a mouse, and I ran off, and it's just weird. So like he says that he goes to a lecture theatre, and everyone or like some part of the audience are all shouting.
Quarter, he says. Quarter.
I want to know what they were saying. It's some hideous obscenity about Jesus. I mean, the mind can only boggle what that could have been. You don't want to repeat it, obviously, but and there. It's just such a bizarre description where he says that, like, oh, and then the other guys in the audience, they were like, oh yeah, they're all demon possessed. Like, what the hell is this? That's such an unrealistic description of an interaction. You just go into a theater and like.
So it's also weird because at the end of the story, like the other members of the audience are supposed to be convinced, right? They're supposed to be convinced that the truth of Christianity. Yeah. But like, how does this work? So first, the rest of the audience says, oh yeah, those people are demon possessed. Then this event unfolds where they're silent. And somehow now they're convinced that Christianity, well, how was it that they thought that these other audience members were demon possessed? If they weren't already convinced of Christianity, like, I don't understand how to put that together. It also, so it's not unusual to have an audience that is disruptive in all kinds of ways. So he went to Soviet Russia to give a talk on, I presume it was some sort of Christian lecture that he intended to give, because that's basically all Hugh Ross does. And so then in Soviet Russia, he's being disrupted by people who don't like his religious message. Okay, but why is that supposed to be surprising? The thing that bothers me about a lot of what we're going to watch today is that even if I make the assumption that Christianity is true, and I make the assumption that there are such things as demons, and I make the assumption that demon possession exists, I still don't understand why I should reach the conclusion that he reaches, which is that this is evidence like the audience was possessed. So because we have alternative explanations, and those alternatives are also available even if demon possession exists, right? So like, I take it that he doesn't think that every time there's a disruptive audience, that every time like one of my students is being disrupted, that they're demon possessed. And I take it that he also would agree that there are such things as mental illness, for instance. I mean, he talked about this person that collapses on the street and starts yelling things. I'm thinking about like, well, was this person schizophrenic? Did they have Tourette's? Did they like? Where I used to live in Nebraska, there was a woman that would stand outside of a building that was near my apartment building, and she would just be yelling like all day and night. I thought that this woman is probably mentally ill, and the reason that she sometimes is yelling about terrorists and whatever else she's yelling about is because she has paranoid delusions. But Ross automatically goes to this having a supernatural explanation, even though I take it under his own view, this event could have another explanation. And I take it that, I don't know exactly what Ross believes, but most Christians, I take it, think that mental illness is more common than demon possession. Well, if mental illness is more common than demon possession, then again, that's a reason that even the Christian should say, oh, I'm not sure about this particular case. Like, why should we think that this particular individual is possessed by a demon?
And I love the way how rigorous he is, and say, well, it could be mental illness, could be demon possession, but here's how we're going. Here's our methodology for how to assess. And so, oh no, wait a minute. Hang on, sorry, my mistake. What was wrong with that? Absolutely nothing.
That's true. And if you think about the story of the woman he supposedly saw outside Caltech, the way he describes it is just, I saw a woman, she was screaming, and she fell over, and I walked away. It's like, fuck you, you're so... even if you thought she was demon-possessed, you do something. Like, wait, you literally just said she stopped screaming when I walked away. Like, it just sounds like... Anyway, I don't think that happened. I think that's... I don't know if it's a lie, but I think it's a make-believe.
Do we believe that he rescued all those women from the witch's coven?
Well,
surely that would make the news. It would be all over his website. Christian astrophysicist rescues oppressed women, sex slaves from witches' coven. It would be all over the news, and I tried to find it as well. Nothing. Oh, we've lost Dan for a sec. He's hopefully going to come back in. But the cartwheel thing, I mean, maybe there's just a girl that does cartwheels out the window and she's, they're like, make her do a cartwheel when she's already doing them. Anyway,
well, it was a sort of puny, it was just such a puny way of demonstrating his supernatural powers as well. It wasn't like, I'll summon thunderbolts from the sky or anything. It was like, I'll make a woman do a cartwheel, a thing she could easily do of her own volition.
If I was sitting there with him, I would ask him, could you have any documentation that you rescued all these girls from this?
Yeah. What was the name of this sex offender guy? What was he called?
Yeah, like basic fact checking.
Yeah. What day did it take place? Where were you? What was the theatre?
Yeah.
No, that's why it just sounds like a dreamscape, because it was just also these floating scenes that just wash through, and they're not like specific. I guess he did say one day I came out of Caltech, but even then I kind of felt like you're just name dropping that you got a job at Caltech, right? It wasn't like, I'll always remember it was the 15th of November and I was blah, blah, blah. It didn't feel like a memory, like where people like organically talk about their own memories. And I guess maybe it's just because it's a story said over and over again or something.
Dan, tell us about the woman. What are your thoughts?
So I think, the thing that's, so on the one hand, as far as I can tell, there just is no evidence that this episode where he goes and rescues all of these women from this warlock ever occurred. I'd like to watch that movie if it exists. But the other thing that to be said here is that it's like the earlier part of the story where he visits the coven. It's weird that, like, how did it come about that he visited this coven? But what I would be willing to imagine is that there's a bunch of people that were like, pulling his leg, that were like, some guy was like, oh yeah, I can tell you anything you want about the Bible, and see that woman over there, like, watch this, and then he just like waved his hand or something, and she just like, not even knowing that they're talking about her, just does cartwheels, and there's, oh yeah, that was my power. I made her do that, and it seems like the kind of thing where either, if it's not just that he made it up, if something actually happened, it sounds like some group of people were just breaking him or something.
It's hard to tell. Was it prank, or did he supernaturally make her do impossible, like a cartwheel?
Yeah.
Okay, so enough about demons, because not quite enough actually, because Hugh Ross believes that UFOs are demons, and he's got a very rigorous argument to suggest this. So let's have a look.
And I can tell you that about 99% of what people report to me as UFOs are phenomena that are naturally explained. They're hoaxes, or it's secret military activity that's going on. When I look at the 1% residual, it has the property of defying the laws of physics, and yet in many cases we can prove that the phenomena is real. We're dealing with non-physical reality. And I took a course from Carl Sagan when I was at the University of Toronto. He was extremely dismissive of UFOs, but that was because his worldview would not tolerate the possibility of non-physical reality. As a Christian, my worldview does tolerate that possibility. God created another realm, independent of the universe, for the angels. And so what we see in this 1% residual, for example, is UFOs coming through our atmosphere at 5 to 18,000 miles per hour, but the witnesses never report a sonic boom. They never report any evidence of heat friction behind the UFO. If this was a physical craft coming through our atmosphere, you would get easily heard sonic booms. And what's coming out with these new reports from the Navy and the Air Force is these pilots actually seeing these UFOs turning sharp right-angle corners or acute angles at 5 to 25,000 miles per hour. No physical object can withstand those G-forces. It would shatter. So we're dealing with non-physical reality.
Wow.
Well, I'm the one Christian as an astrophysicist has written on this phenomena, but I know of 5 others who've spent at least a decade studying the UFO phenomena who are not believers, but they agree with me that we're dealing with something beyond the space-time dimensions of the universe. The French astrophysicist Jacques Vallée, who's put the most research into the UFO phenomena, says we're dealing with interdimensional beings. Now, from a Christian perspective, we would recognize that angels are interdimensional beings. In these close encounters, in no case is it beneficial for the human contactee. It's always deleterious. The best you're going to come away with from a close encounter is recurring terrifying nightmares. What's the worst case scenario? People have been killed by these encounters. And then when you look at those cases where a communication has come from these UFO beings to the human contactee, number one, their astronomy is never accurate. Phenomena always keeps pace with our advancing technology. And there are signs of deception. And where there is actual verbal communication taking place, a famous incident is where the human contactee was put into a trance and then began to write a book. It's almost 4,000 pages long, and a third of the content of the Orontia book is focused on denying the deity of Jesus Christ.
Wow.
But astronomers today now recognize that there cannot be intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. Why? Because everywhere else we look, we're looking back in time. And we now have the astronomical data to establish that it's physically impossible to bring intelligent life upon the cosmic scene in less than 13.79 billion years. And since that's where we are right now, we must be the first intelligent life on the cosmic scene. God could have created them, but he would have created them at this moment, and since their data is from the past, which means we really should be shutting down the enterprise of looking for intelligent life elsewhere in the universe.
So, there's multiple different ways in which these arguments are all sort of uniformly bad. So first I'll take the argument, let's start at the end there. The argument we finished with was that since we are looking out into the universe, we're looking back in time, and maybe we occupy some special point in the universe's history, there couldn't be other life at the other places that we can look. Well, that's first of all, Alpha Centauri is something like 4 light years away. Does he dispute that human beings were around 4 years ago? Our genus has been on Earth for the past 2 million years. Our species has been around for something like 200,000 years. There are plenty of stars that are within either 2 million or 200,000 light years of Earth. And all of those stars would have had, it's kind of an accident that we developed the level of technological sophistication at the point in our history when we did. If things had turned out differently, that can either be pushed back, or it may have taken us longer to develop that technology. It's conceivable that of all of those stars that are within 200,000 light years of Earth, that if there's life, if there's some sort of like sentient intelligences near one of those stars, that they could easily have spacefaring technology within this time scale. But the other thing to be said here is that even if you could somehow rule out the possibility that these are aliens, and even if you want to go with it being something incredible, something more than just like mistaken instrumentation or people in error or whatever, you want to say that there really was something truly bizarre going on. Well, fine, I've got other bizarre things that are not aliens or demons. So there could be time travelers, or there could be the folks from Atlantis that now occupy a deep cavern under the ground. I mean, the hypotheses here are sort of endless, and if you just allow yourself to sort of freely speculate in the way that he tends to do, then you can put all kinds of outlandish hypotheses. Hypotheses that, while implausible, are no less implausible than the demon hypothesis, that would also explain these craft. Now, the other thing to be said here is that suppose that, so he one of the things he wants to say about why you can rule out the alien hypothesis is that these craft do things that are physically impossible. But he can't really know that. What he can know is that they violate the laws of physics as we understand those laws. But if you had an advanced alien civilization, perhaps they can do things, perhaps they have a better understanding of physics than we do. And just as like a cell phone would seem miraculous to a medieval person, perhaps this alien civilization's technology seems miraculous to us. It seems like it violates the laws as we understand them. The same thing, of course, is going to be true about the time travelers or the Atlanteans from the deep underground cavern. I think, though, that it's much more likely that all of these UAP sightings are just from instrumentation malfunctions, or that like there's something wrong with the data. There's a great collection of videos from there's a YouTube channel called Corridor Crew. They're special effects artists, and they review videos kind of in some sense like we review videos. And they have a series where they've gone through, looked at a bunch of these UAP videos. Other channels have done that too. And I think those channels have better explanations than demons as to how there could be all this supposedly anomalous footage and so on.
Could it be there's a bug on the screen?
Yeah, right. And that's one of the things that happens is that there are things that where like the scale is misjudged, or like the distance between the camera and an object is misjudged, and then this object is reported as going faster than is physically possible. But actually, if you had the correct scale, then if you redo the mathematics with the correct scale, you find out that it's not moving anywhere near the kind of velocity that you thought it was moving at.
So let's go back to what I think is just the dishonesty of Hugh Ross in his representation of the astronomical community, and how it doesn't even make logical sense, because he says, well, there can't be life out. Us astronomers, we recognize there can't be life out there in the cosmos. That's why we should shut down SETI. Presumably the people at SETI don't agree with him. Otherwise, they would have shut themselves down, right? So by his own implication of what's out there, he must admit that the astronomical community doesn't agree with him. Similarly, the bit about, we've shown that it's non-physical, right? Well, NASA investigated this. David Spergel was the chair of their committee. He's one of the most respected theoretical cosmologists in the world. He was the theorist on the NASA's WMAP mission that mapped out the cosmic microwave background. He was the chair, and he said, you know what? We find no evidence of extraterrestrials. Although, of course, I have to admit, he didn't rule out demons. So maybe Hugh Ross has got us there. But, it just seems completely like the way that Craig misrepresents cosmology, where he says, well, the cosmologists agree that the universe had a beginning, when they don't. Exactly the same thing going on here. It seems to be a theme in Christian apologetics these days.
Yeah, I think it's significantly worse here because at least there are physicists that think that there was and like reputable physicists who think that the universe had a beginning, whereas I don't think any reputable person thinks that UAPs are plausible candidates as demons. The argument doesn't even make any sense. Like, if I was writing a story about like demons visiting the Earth, I wouldn't have them like hand out astronomical misinformation, and I wouldn't have them like zooming around in the sky to be sighted by airplanes. Like, why would demons do that? This doesn't make any sense. Like,
But yeah, so it's like in standard sort of haunting films or whatever, when the, let's say, motivations of the ghost don't make any sense. Like why is, so if I died and I was like, I woke up in some like, ghostly realm or whatever, I would be going around creaking floorboards and slamming doors and stuff. So why would you do that? What's the point? Even if it works as a kind of dramatic device for telling a scary story, where the point of it is to just have a jump scare that the audience gets some catharsis out of. Well, that's fine. It works as a premise for that type of thing. But if you actually believe that this is real, I don't understand what are you thinking is going on? Why are the demons doing that? What are they thinking? What is their motivation? It doesn't make any sense from their point of view. This is taking it even further, but the idea of demons at all doesn't really make any sense, because presumably they all know that God exists, right? Satan knows that God exists. So he must know that God's the all-powerful being or whatever that's definitely going to win. There's no way that Satan's going to win the cosmic struggle, is he? So they've hitched their wagon to what they know is definitely the wrong side in this cosmic battle or whatever. It makes no sense at all. Right? It's completely stupid. So I don't know. It's worse than the aliens thing. At least if with the aliens, it's like, well, they could be, exploring the galaxy and trying to meet life forms and communicate with them or something. There's no motivation that makes any sense for a demon. You have to be like, oh, they're evil and they want to get you. Something. It's just babyish. It's laughable. I can't imagine that there's like a decent chunk of people who are fully grown adults who actually believe this. It's nonsense. Honestly, it's crazy.
Well, the question is, why is it on Capturing Christianity? Presumably because this gets him the views. Why is he taking this seriously?
yeah, it's a struggle to see that it's a channel that had, like hosted Josh Rasmussen and Graham Oppie having a debate, and now it's got this sort of trash on there. Honestly, I mean, I don't want to speculate on what's going on in Cameron's mind or business model, but like this guy, the stuff he's saying, like the guy who supposedly predicted that Trump was going to get shot in the ear. I mean, come on, this is poor. It's poor content. I mean, yeah,
but it's popular, So
yeah, I suppose it is.
All right, so we go on to something a bit more conventional apologetics.
We can answer the question, if God created the universe, who created God? Now, you just heard me explain that the physics now tells us that there's a God beyond space and time that created space and time. And when someone says, well, if God created the universe, who created God? They're presuming that God is constrained in time the same way we are. Any entity that's constrained to a single dimension of time, where time can't be stopped or reversed, must have a beginning along that line of time, some ultimate beginning along that line of time. And so my astronomer, physicist friends were basically presuming that God was constrained in time the same way we are. But he created time, so he can't be constrained by time. And in science, the fundamental definition of time is that dimension in which cause and effect phenomena occur. Well, guess what? God's involved in cause and effect before time even exists. Which means at a minimum, God must be able to operate in the equivalent of 2 dimensions of time, not just 1 dimension of time. And if that is the case, then we can presume that the universe is on this line of time, but since God has got access to a plane of time, where he got a length of time and a width of time, he can be operating on an infinite number of timelines in an infinite number of directions. So he could operate on a timeline here that never crosses or touches the timeline of our universe. As such, he would have no beginning, no ending, and would be uncreated. Now, of all the holy books of the religions of the world, only the Bible says of God, no beginning, no ending, uncreated. The Bible is also the only holy book that says of God that God can arbitrarily expand time in our context or compress time. An example is Psalm 90, where it says, a day of the Lord is like 1,000 years. 1,000 years is like a day. 1,000 years is like 3 hours in the night. Mathematically, that's only possible for a being that's got access to at least 2 dimensions of time.
What I really like about that clip is that he pulls up the folder for some reason because it helps him. And as he lifts it up, something from inside just falls onto the floor. And I always think that symbolizes his brains falling out of his nose as he's talking to us. It's just like, anyway, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, Dan, look, I mean, there are extra dimensions in string theory. He has now answered the age-old problem of who caused God. It's genius, isn't it?
So I don't understand how this argument is supposed to work. So first of all, I don't think it's true that just because something exists in linear one-dimensional time that it has to have a beginning.
Yeah.
I don't see how that follows from anything.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, like, I don't understand how it follows from there being 2 dimensions of time that an entity would have no beginning. Or if suppose that inference does go through, suppose it's true that if you have multiple dimensions of time, if you exist in some sort of hyper time, that you don't have how do we know that the universe, the physical reality, doesn't exist in hyper time, right? Like, now he's made, in some sense, the things like the Kalam argument worse, because since he's now added this like extra condition that you have to satisfy in order to have a beginning, it's now much less clear that the universe actually has a beginning, because you need to be able to check to see whether or not the universe satisfies this condition of existing in hypertime. The other thing that's really strange about this is that he seems to have this kind of pre-relativistic understanding of time, where time is the same for everyone, for everything. But for instance, there are cosmic rays bombard our planet from outer space, and in the upper atmosphere, where the cosmic rays are coming in, the interaction between those cosmic rays and the atmosphere produces particles that are called muons, which are kind of like electrons, but heavier. They have more mass than electrons have. They're also unstable. They decay within 2.2 microseconds. And this is a really important point, that even though muons characteristically decay within 2.2 microseconds, and even though there's not enough time for them to get from the upper atmosphere to the Earth's surface, they still do get to the Earth's surface. And the reason why they get to the Earth's surface is because even though, according to the clocks that each muon effectively carries, less than 2.2 microseconds passes in their journey from the upper atmosphere to the Earth's surface, from our perspective, sitting here on the ground, more time than 2.2 microseconds happens. So the muons experience time differently than we do. And, viewers may be familiar with the fact that if you go close to a black hole, you'll also experience time differently. It's a big plot point of the movie Interstellar. And so, yeah, it doesn't require occupying a separate dimension. Or if you'd like, one way to think about this is that, so people talk about what's called many-fingered time. And the idea is that each object, like part of the relativistic description of the world, is that each object carries with it its own clock. And that clock, the way that it ticks relative to other clocks, depends upon their relative motion. That's why two observers can start off in the same place, meet up again later, but either more or less time will have gone by for one or the other. And that's how the twin paradox works, for instance. But the idea is that if you want to think about it in terms of dimensions, I guess you could say that there are as many time dimensions as there are point-like objects. It's astonishing to me that someone with a PhD in physics would express so little understanding of even the basics of how relativity works.
Yeah, so from reading his book, it seems, was it Cosmos and Creator? There were so many sort of basic physics errors in it that I just was flabbergasted. And I'll tell you an interesting anecdote. I met Hugh Ross at a Christian conference, the Unbelievable conference that my friend Justin Briley hosted, and Justin introduced me to Hugh Ross. And I was chatting with him, and I said, "Oh, but I think what you said there was wrong. There was a paper on the archive that contradicted that." And he said to me, "What's the archive?" Now, not everyone who's watching this will know what the archive is, but anyone involved in physics will know what it is, because what it is, it's like the online repository for all papers that get published in physics. So every physicist publishes their paper on the archive before it gets in a journal. So everyone's reading things on the archive. I don't know if they ever bother reading it in a journal anymore, because it's always on the archive first. The fact that he'd never heard of it just tells you how utterly detached he is from the world of physics. So I just find this just incredible. But Alex, tell us about time. Does this make any sense from a philosophical point of view?
So sometimes people do try and appeal to these other dimensions of time, hyper time or whatever. So it's sometimes people bring this up in relation to Mctaggerts paradox, and it seems to me it's not a very plausible candidate. So one thing you might say is the passage of time, right? Like the moving spotlight going across the dimension or whatever, that involves two notions of time together. Right? One is the distance between 2 points is like an hour or a year or something, but also the moving spotlight rolls along the timeline, and that motion is inevitably requires some kind of notion of time, keeping track of how fast is it moving along the timeline, right? So unless you want the trivial answer of it moves 1 second per second or 1 minute per minute, which seems uninformative. The natural thing to think, if you want to go down this line, is to suppose that there's some other dimension that's tracking the speed at which time passes, right? So I think as a solution to Mctaggerts paradox, it's not very helpful, because you basically just reintroduce the paradox again. Now you've got a hypertime, whatever the time dimension is that's keeping track of the movement of the now.
Alex, I'm not sure everyone will know Mctaggerts paradox. You want to give us a quick explanation?
Off the top of my head, no, not really, because it's one of those paradoxes. So it basically is around the turn of the 20th century. This philosopher Mctaggart, it's influenced by British idealism. Coming a generation before Russell and Wittgenstein and that lot. He's a good philosopher, right, in his own right, but famous really for just a particular paper. It's called Unreality of Time, where he introduced this concept of the A theory and the B theory, which are familiar to people who gone to the Kalam and stuff like that. And he puts almost everybody in the field of philosophy of time has taken the kind of language of A theory, B theory stuff forwards, but almost nobody agrees with him about the way that he uses them in this paper. And he presents this really obscure, difficult to pass paradox where apparently time can't exist, because
Right. And the other thing is, he just does, as Dan pointed out, that he just doesn't consider the possibility, well, if there is another dimension of time, why can't the universe have another dimension of time? And in fact, there are serious physicists. Itzhak Bar has published a paper or book about extra dimensions of time. And my own co-author, Nia Shafshordi, has used extra dimensions of time and so has Cameron Vaffer, I believe, one of the world's leading string theorists, in cosmological schemes. So why does he not consider this? It's just mind-blowing to me that he thinks, well, if there is this extra dimension of time, only God could be in it. Why can't the universe be in it? And then the universe could have no beginning. I mean, it's just so straightforward.
As far as Mctaggerts paradox goes, there's a great video that I can send you, it's a series of videos that I can send you that we can put in the show notes for people who may be interested in what that exactly is.
So let's move on to the next argument. This is going to be on one of my favorite topics, animal suffering.
Let me ask the question the other way. Why would God create a universe, or create an Earth, at least here, where animals are dying? Is there any utility in that?
Well, there is a utility in the sense that thanks to all this plant and animal death that preceded us, we human beings can establish a large population with the technology to take the good news of salvation to all the people groups of the world in thousands of years rather than millions of years.
So how does that play out? Put a little bit of specificity to that. I mean, what is it that, deer and antelope and elk dying and getting stuck in tar pits? I mean, so where does that actually play out?
Well, where do you think the tar comes from? I mean, the tar is basically the residue of dead animals that preceded us. And so all that coal, oil, and natural gas is available to us because of all these generations of plant and animal death that preceded us. And that's just a tiny part of it. Limestone and marble adds up to 75 quadrillion tons that we're able to exploit.
And limestone and marble being the decaying shells, or the shells of decaying animals,
correct.
If you will. So.
But that's how we build our freeways and our skyscrapers. So all this amazing technology we have is thanks to the fact that God has packed our planet with as much life as possible, as diverse as possible, and as long as possible. And that's what makes the redemption of humanity able to be fulfilled in just a short period of time.
So we're the beneficiaries. God's actually providing the resources, given the laws of physics, he set things up. He's providing us with the resources to do what he's asking us to do.
It's a gift. It's a gift to humanity.
There's another aspect that I'd like to look at. Because you look at some of the animals, and they're also very efficient predators, if you will. Kind of the idea that they just became that way after the fall would mean that there's almost a hodgepodge to that. It almost looks like they're designed. How would you articulate that, or what would you respond to that?
Well, you're right on target. I mean, the way God has designed these predators, it actually maximizes the quality of life and the population of the herbivores.
How do you mean that?
Okay. Notice that the predators are designed so they're only able to kill the weak, the sick, the dying, and the unwary. That actually helps the health of the predator, the herbivore population. And we've seen
so it provides food for the predator as well as keeping the herbivore population healthy and strong as well.
Healthy and strong and at a high population level. Take away the predators and you're going to have immense death and suffering amongst the herbivore population. So it's actually a gift to the very prey upon which the predators are feeding.
Actually, can I take this one first? Because I've published on animal suffering, and to me, this is the lack of empathy for the animal suffering in, dying in a tar pit or in a mass extinction, or, just of old age of a disease. Who knows how they might die and what suffering they may experience. And he's like, well, yeah, but it's a gift for us. So we get to use their resources. I mean, it's just unbelievably cruel. And the predators, I mean, all right, so there is function for predators in biological ecosystems, but why do they have to kill so painfully? I mean, there are species of leech that will suck your blood and you don't feel it. I mean, I've heard some people say that they actually give you an anesthetic. I don't know if that's accurate, but certainly I've had this happen to me. I've come from a hike out in the forest, and sure enough, there's a leech sucking on my blood and I didn't feel a thing. So why couldn't other predators have that? I mean, it's just an enormous failure of the imagination. And why couldn't God just give us those resources without killing all the animals? I mean, when I was a child growing up in Hebrew school, we were told that when the Hebrews were in the desert, in their 40 years sojourn, God sent manna down from heaven, and that's what we ate. Why couldn't he do that? I mean, it's just an unbelievable. So it's just lack of imagination and lack of empathy.
And there's something kind of like sort of retrofitting whatever it is you happen to find yourself in, and go, aha, it must be this way because God exists and wants it to be exactly like this. You know, like if Hugh Ross had found that the universe that he was in was like the Terminator 2 universe, you know, I'm thinking of that like beginning scenes where you have these Terminators with these death machines rolling over like highways of skulls and stuff. And he'd be like, well, if all the generations of people before hadn't made a highway of skulls, how would we have been able to drive our death machines so triumphantly down this avenue that we've got here? Anything it was like would be justification, because like it's basically what is it, post hoc ergo propter hoc or whatever, right? Like after this, so it must be because of that kind of thing, right? So that's a fundamental type of misunderstanding I think he betrays. I think most of these clips, he's kind of like working backwards from the conclusion. I suppose that's quite a trite thing to say, really, but like it's really on show here how he's working backwards from. How else would we have like massive loads of marble if it wasn't countless generations of animal suffering beforehand? You know, God could just make it. He's omnipotent. He made the universe out of nothing. He could make some marble. Like it's yeah. Anyway, so
I think there's a really important sense in which this isn't even a potential solution to the theological problem, because God only gets out of like having done something, some act of evil or some such, if in fact there was no alternative way of doing things that would have been would not have involved either this evil or an evil equally as great, right? So like, but as a matter of metaphysical necessity, there's no such thing, right? Like, as you pointed out, it's perfectly within God's power to do all of this without that suffering. And so long as that's true, it doesn't solve the theological problem. The other issue here, the other reason it doesn't solve the theological problem is that I think it should be a general moral principle that you can, all else being equal, someone can rightfully suffer for some greater good, so long as benefits accrue to that person in virtue of that greater good. So maybe you have to pay taxes, but paying taxes is better for both for you and for everyone else, because now we get things like public parks and public education and so on. But if it turned out that there just was no even conceivable benefit to you from paying taxes, then everything else being equal, it seems like you might wonder, like, why should someone else take that money from you for something that isn't going to contribute to some greater good in which you are going to be a participant? When we're talking about animal suffering, when we're talking about, for instance, the creation of those tar pits or the creation of the limestone or whatever, insofar as that actually involved animal suffering, so involved the suffering of sentient animals, there just was no benefit that accrued to those animals in virtue of that limestone or that tar.
Yeah, unless, of course, they get the benefits in the afterlife, a la Trent Doherty. But I think that's very implausible. The tar pits example is actually, we had that in our paper, and the guy asking him the question is Jeff Zweering. And Jeff, I know, I met him at a conference, and we actually kind of got along. We had he actually asked me to check through his book, so I was kind of an editor on that of some sort. And so that may be the tar pit example came because of our discussions. And I brought it up because the animals dying in the tar pit, basically they get stuck in the tar pit. Another animal sees an easy meal. They get stuck, and nobody, at least for the fawn that we all know about, the the fawn dying in the forest. This is supposed to be the classic example of animal suffering. It's in a forest fire and it dies in the fire. It's rose fawn. At least another animal might be able to eat the remains of that. In this case, it's just utterly pointless.
Sorry,
They just.
What he was talking about was the formation of the tar pit, which isn't the same thing.
He is, but that's true. But I'm saying is he's not thought about the suffering of the animal in the tar pit. He's just like, well, where does the tar pit come from? And but he's like, what about the animal that's actually dying in the tar pit? What's the justification for that?
Yeah, if I was going to be really extreme about this, I would say that it's basically crypto-fascist kind of authoritarianism that's coming through here. I mean, because it's basically like saying that the suffering of the Untermensch is justified in the furtherance of the nation state or whatever. I mean, it's the same argument. You could come up with the same stuff. Like, why did we have to crush the when we were setting up empire and going around the world crushing all these like native peoples and the fledgling civilizations in different parts of the world? I mean, it's like, you can, if you want to be a fascist about it, an authoritarian, you can justify that into the greatness of the empire and the conquests and stuff. And that just basically seems to be the same type of argument that he's saying there. Like, it's worth it if all of these innocent animals suffer for millions of years, because now I get to build like statues out of their crushed shells that have become marble or whatever. It's just the same, it seems to me. So yeah, it's sort of very uncomfortable listening to that, in my view.
Sorry, isn't the tar pit formed from like the bacteria and the breakdown of plant matter and so on? Isn't it? I think I have that right, don't I?
I think that's right. Yeah.
That's how oil forms. Is that like during the Carboniferous, the microorganisms that feast on the I think it's the cellulose in trees hadn't evolved yet, and so you just get these huge piles of trees that get compactified over geologic time and eventually form into oil. That's why it's a myth that, for instance, dinosaur bones get that's where oil comes from. They're not from dinosaur bones; they're from this plant matter from millions of years before dinosaurs. But anyway, I think it's a really interesting point here that, like, so if it's right that that's something like that's how tar forms originally, then like a better response, at least in terms of the formation of the tar pit, would be that, like, well, plants don't experience suffering, so like the plant matter that goes into the tar wouldn't involve animal suffering. But then I think both of you have this great rejoinder, which is like, well, but given that the tar pit is there over geologic time, you now have this like avenue for creating animal suffering, and that's exactly the problem, right? Is that, like, well, okay, the formation of this thing didn't do it, but that actually the presence of it through long periods of time does.
Imagine God gave the animals an instinct to avoid the tar pit, just like they have an instinct to avoid fire. I mean, would that really be so difficult? And then the horrible suffering that they have when they go into the tar pit would be avoided. So what Hugh Ross needs to do is to give some explanation as to why God couldn't have done that. And all he says is that, well, the tar pit's useful for us, is to completely miss the point.
Yeah,
and it's like he hasn't even understood what the problem is.
There was another. So he also gives this example of the hunters and their prey or whatever, and actually it's good for the prey to be hunted on by, I guess presumably what he means is he's got this idea of like Serengeti kind of lions and gazelles and stuff. And okay, so the lions are picking off the weak and the young, and that's maintaining some balance in the health and reproductive fitness, I guess, of the gazelles or whatever it is that they're eating. And okay, maybe there are examples like that where that's the balance that nature has arrived at over, however many millions of years or whatever, of getting to that point. It's bound to be balanced, isn't it? Because it's had ages to get there. But the point is, it could have balanced out in a different way. And, it's not like every single species has to be moderated by a prey, some kind of prey that's killing them off. Who's moderating the lions' reproductive fitness? And how come there aren't just like loads of lions all the time? And are they like degrading over time because, like, I don't know, eagles aren't like killing their young and they're keeping them in. So obviously you don't have to think very hard about it. Like you can just imagine and perfectly well see species that just don't have loads of predators constantly keeping their populations in check. I mean, lions themselves are one of them, but you can just imagine another, something like cows or something where it just exists on some island where there aren't any lions or anything big enough to eat them. That's not impossible, is it? That could obviously happen. So you could set up, you could just have it. There's loads of animals and they're all vegans. Like that's possible, right? Why isn't that? The thing he's saying, again, it's like working backwards from stuff is like this now. So there must be, that it has to be like this because of God or something. He's just shoehorning in the conclusion, regardless of what the setup is. Just like he just finds this contingent way things are, and then reasons backwards from that to it must be that God made it, right? That seems to be the fundamental kind of mistake that's going on.
And if it's super beneficial for the prey species, would he advocate the same in human populations? Let's just kill all the weak ones, because hey, we're all better off. I mean, it's just carrying on, I guess, your theme, Alex. It's basically fascism.
Yeah.
So, why not just do the same in humans?
And it's fascism in a deeper sense because or maybe I should say authoritarianism. I mean, I don't know if it, but so in any case, the reason why it's authoritarianism in this deeper sense is that historically authoritarians appeal to the divine to try to say that some social order, some pre-existing social order was the way that things ought to be, right? I mean, this was how it is that patriarchal societies justify patriarchy, that God ordained that man would dominate over woman. It's also how it's how authoritarians justify the domination of one race over another, that they say that, well, it's like God has ordained this one particular race as the one that ought to be dominant, and that they can take the others as slaves for themselves. I mean, it's even in the Bible, of course, that the slaughters of the Amalekites and the Canaanites. But in any case, I think this is really important, that historically this is precisely how authoritarians justified what they were doing, and still how some authoritarians today justify what they're doing. That something they find in the world must be there because that's what God deemed it should be, and therefore isn't worth changing.
How topical we are, because it looks like America may well have an authoritarian dictator in power quite soon. So we will see what happens in the upcoming election. But let's move on to the next clip.
Yeah, if you're watching this in the future, we've all been shot by Trump's fascist police that came around and got us because of this show.
Right.
We astronomers have been able to develop what are now referred to as the space-time theorems. And the power of these theorems, they're based on only two assumptions. If the universe contains mass, and if general relativity reliably describes the movements of bodies in the universe, then space and time must be created, which implies there must be an agent, a causal agent beyond space and time that created our universe of matter, energy, space, and time. And that's what distinguishes the God of the Bible from the non-biblical gods. The non-biblical gods create within space and time that eternally exists, but the God of the Bible creates independent of space and time. Space and time don't exist until God creates the universe. So these space-time theorems actually are establishing that the God of the Bible is the one responsible for the universe. Now, there are two assumptions. One assumption is that the universe must contain mass. But as I look out at all of you, each one of you is living proof that the universe contains mass. A few of you a little more so than others, okay? And then the second assumption, general relativity, reliably describing the movements of bodies in the universe. Today, that ranks as the most exhaustively tested and best proven principle in all of physics. We can actually verify this to 16 places of the decimal. So nothing is more secure in physics than the reliability of special and general relativity. And the latest of these space-time theorems says that any universe that expands, and only a universe that expands permits the existence of physical life, has a beginning, implying this agent beyond space and time. This was formed by three authors, all of them non-theists, Arvind Borde, Alexander Vilenkin, and Alan Guth. And Vilenkin, 2 years later, said this in a book that he wrote. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. And he defined that problem. The problem is a God beyond space and time created the universe. But the Bible said it first. in the very first sentence. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, I didn't really get to know Christians well until I was 27 years of age, but I picked up a Bible at age 17. It was a Gideon Bible, and I saw this heavens and earth. And I said, well, I want to find out where it talks about the universe. In biblical Hebrew, there is no word for universe, but they have this phrase, Shamayim Ares, with the definite articles translated the heavens and the earth. Whenever you see that phrase in the Old Testament, it means the entirety of physical reality. The whole of the universe of matter, energy, space, and time shows up 9 times in the Old Testament. So Genesis 1:1 is speaking about the fact that the universe has a beginning and God was responsible for that beginning. To quote a New Testament passage, the universe was formed at God's command, so what was seen was not made out of what was visible.
Do you mind if I take this one first? Because there's a few things to say. What I'm not going to say is any much about the Border-Guth-Vilenkin theorem. We've covered that over and over again. But what I want to say is, oh man, so much wrong. First off, what's with calling it space-time theorems? They're called singularity theorems. He can't even get the name of the theorem right. Then he says they only have 2 assumptions. That's not true. They have more than 2 assumptions. Another assumption would be like in Newtonian physics, you just have mass, like creating gravity, but in relativity, you have pressure. So if you have a negative pressure term, you can violate those theorems. And indeed, inflationary cosmology is supposed to do that. Also, there's no closed time-like curves. This is where time curves back on itself. That's another assumption of the theorem. And it's like he hasn't even understood the basic problem of cosmology. Yes, general relativity is very well verified. The problem is it contradicts quantum mechanics, which is also very, very well verified. And so that's why people think we don't trust these theorems. It's like he hasn't even understood what the problem is. I mean, at least Craig will address it. Oh, yes, physicists say we need a quantum theory of gravity, but here's my reason why it doesn't matter. I mean, he hasn't even got what the problem is. The next thing is he says only the Bible has God, operating without space. No, it doesn't mention that in the Bible. But maybe 1,000 years before the Bible, right? There's the Ring Vegas, sorry. They talk. Here's a quote. Okay, this is from the Nasadya Sutta, which is thought to be written somewhere between 2000 and 1000 BC. We don't know exactly when. It says, quote, "There even non-existence was not there, nor existence there was no air there, nor the space beyond it." Right. So it's just not true that the Bible even says there was anything about no space. But another religious theorist does. So why didn't he pick that one? The idea that he'd never met a Christian living in Canada, that seems somewhat implausible to me. What else does he say? The Border-Guth-Vilenkin theorem implies a causal agent, and he quotes Vilenkin's book. And in Vilenkin's book, of course, Vilenkin says we don't need a cause, right? He doesn't mention the problem is we're going to have God. No, he doesn't say that at all. And it's like in quotes with the guy's name on it, it implies a causal agent. No, absolutely not. Vilenkin is very clear. He doesn't think there is a cause to the universe. Mm-hmm. So how can you quote Vilenkin as saying we need a causal agent when he explicitly says he didn't? That we don't, sorry. So either he didn't actually read Vilenkin's book, or he's just completely dishonest.
Well, I think
misquoting it.
I actually think the standard quote, about nowhere for physicists to hide anymore, whatever, blah blah blah. That was a quote that said that it was by Vilenkin. It had the page numbers and stuff. Yeah. In the next slide, unless I'm much mistaken, he said. That Vilenkin says this is the problem, whatever, but there's not a quote. It's not in quote marks. There's no citation, and it doesn't say it's from him. He verbally gives the impression to the audience that that's what Vilenkin was saying, but he doesn't. So I don't know whether it's ignorance so much as like used car salesman tactics, right? It's like
it's a sleight of hand. It's a sleight of hand. Yeah, it's like I show you the quote, and then I'm going to flip the card quick, and you won't notice that the next bit isn't a quote.
Yeah. Here's a safety rating for a similar car. Anyway, this car, you should buy it. It's great. That's basically what he just did.
Yeah. Dan?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll try not to reiterate too much of what you said. Of course, I agree with all of it. But so first, it's easy to construct a space-time that includes massive objects but doesn't have a beginning. We have loads of examples of those kinds of space-times. I mean, you just have a space-time that has a single mass in it. That's it. That's a space-time with mass, which general relativity is true. There's no beginning. But even if you do construct a space-time with a beginning that's also compatible with general relativity, it follows from my favorite set of theorems, the Mellman-Manchak theorems, that I can easily construct another observationally indistinguishable space-time without a beginning, but that is also compatible with general relativity. Second, so as we've already said, he's presumably, when he says space-time theorems, he means singularity theorems, like those that are constructed by Hawking and Penrose, or Booth, Borda, Guth, and Vilenkin. Sorry, Borda. It's Borda, right?
It's Borda. I haven't said Borda because Carol says Borda, but it's Borda.
Well, I frequently screw this up myself, but it is Borda. But those theorems have, all of those theorems have extra conditions that Ross simply doesn't mention. And Frank Turek does this similar sort of thing where he just says, like, well, if general relativity is true, then the universe must have a beginning. It's like, no, that doesn't. We know of tons of solutions to the Einstein, including some of the simplest solutions, some of the first solutions ever found to the Einstein field equations, or ones without a beginning. And then these theorems that do supposedly tell us about a beginning, they have extra conditions, as we were just saying, but they also have conditions like there's a differentiability condition on your space-time manifold. They require the Hawking-Penrose theorem has a condition on the existence of a trapped surface that it requires, and also, as Phil also already mentioned, there's a condition on space-time's matter-energy content that we already know quantum fields can violate. And then third, the singularity theorems themselves really, we're told often they tell us about the beginning of the universe, but actually they really don't really tell us about the beginning of anything, or the creation of anything. Here's one way you can see that. So general relativity doesn't include in itself a notion of a direction of time. You can insert that notion, you can bring that notion if you want in, and you can say, okay, we're going to identify this part of the model as the past, and maybe this part over here as the present. But really, the models that general relativity gives us form something more like what philosophers of time sometimes called a C-series. They don't have a direction of time built in. You have to impose that on the theory, which means that when you identify like some boundary as a beginning, that's like something extra that you have to then impose onto the theory. The theory itself has no distinction between a universe that has a beginning but no ending, or one that has an ending but no beginning. Those are the same thing as far as general relativity is concerned. And for that very reason, general relativity doesn't have a notion of a creation. So to say that as long as general relativity is true, you have a creation, it doesn't make sense. That's an extra notion you have to impose onto the theory, and you have to get that notion from somewhere.
So let's move on to the very last clip. This is going to be about why is the universe so old?
In fact, I was on an airplane once with an atheist quantum physicist, and he asked me this question. Okay, if God really wanted human beings, why wait 13.8 billion years? So I was able to explain to him, given the laws of physics and the space-time dimensions that God chose, then if we were placed here any earlier in the history of the universe, light from the cosmic creation event would not have enough time to travel on the space surface of the universe and reach our telescopes. So for example, if we were created 5 billion years earlier in cosmic history, we'd only be seeing the last 2/3 of cosmic history. We would be completely ignorant about the cosmic creation event. Now the same thing's true in the future, because right now we're living at a time when the farthest reaches of the universe are expanding relative to us at the velocity of light. Now, because of dark energy, in the future they'll expand it more rapidly than the velocity of light. So if God put us here any later in the history of the universe, light from the cosmic creation event would be moving away from us at greater than the velocity of light, which means we wouldn't see it. Again, if God were to put us here 5 billion years into the future, we'd only be seeing the last 2/3 of the history of the universe. The one that created the universe wanted us human beings,
not only to be able to read the entirety of the 66 books of the Bible, he wanted us to be able to read the entirety of the book of nature, to be able to witness 100% of its history. And as an astronomer, I can tell you, it's our ability to actually directly image the cosmic creation event, to actually see what the universe looked like when it was only 1/100 billionth of a trillionth of a second old, where we get the most compelling, rigorous scientific proof that a God beyond space and time created everything. God put us here at the one time in cosmic history when we could witness what he was doing from the cosmic creation event forward in time. Astronomy is the one discipline of science where we directly access the past. Or as I tell my wife, because I'm an astronomer, I cannot be held responsible for events in the present. All of my data comes from the past, because it takes light time to travel from stars and galaxies to our telescopes. But we now have the capability to look so far away, we're looking literally at the cosmic creation event 13.8 billion years ago. So God so loved the human race that he invested 13.8 billion years of meticulous design to make a place for us to live and enjoy life and view all of cosmic history.
Oh my God, there's so much wrong with it. I'll just pick one thing, then we'll share things out. But he just doesn't understand basic astronomy. Honestly, this guy's got a PhD and he doesn't even understand basic astronomy. No, you cannot see the Big Bang with any current technology. That is wrong. That is false. Okay. And it's not direct observation anyway. I mean, so the oldest thing you can see at the moment is the cosmic microwave background, emitted 380,000 years after the Big Bang. Okay. You cannot see beyond that because the CMB is like a wall. Okay. It's like a fog. You cannot see through it. So there's absolutely no observations of anything before that at the moment with any current technology. Now, to be a little bit generous, maybe what he might say is, well, we can infer that inflation happened. And maybe that's what he said by looking at things in the CMB. Now, people debate whether you can make that inference. Okay. That's an active area of debate in cosmology. Most cosmologists think inflation did happen and you can make those inferences, but there's a fair few that think that's wrong, that those inferences are incorrect. So that's an area of controversy. Okay. But it's not a direct observation, right? Even the CMB itself is not a direct observation because what you actually directly observe are just CMB photons. Now, there's lots of CMB photons coming from other astrophysical sources like the Milky Way. So what you do is you make maps of those, right? Then you subtract out those and you try and infer what the CMB is. But don't forget the CMB is 380,000 years after the Big Bang. Now, it's possible with future technology, like we might be able to detect cosmic neutrinos. They would be emitted 1 second after the Big Bang, but very difficult, certainly not happened yet. And I don't think there's much prospect of that happening anytime soon. Then there's a possibility of gravitational waves. They would be, from the cosmic creation event, I guess, from inflation, but they've never been detected. And there's no guarantee they will be detected. They might be. I'm optimistic that maybe we will, but there's no guarantee of it because inflationary models. I'll just finish. Inflationary models don't tell you what the magnitude of those gravitational waves are. So it could be that they're impossible to detect, which would disprove Hugh Ross's theorem because he's basically saying God has ensured it that we can observe all of cosmic history. But if those gravitational waves are lower than what our detectors could ever detect, even if they were emitted, and it's possible inflation didn't happen, so they wouldn't be emitted. But even in that scenario, it's possible we'll never detect them. But anyway, go on, Dan.
So I was just going to say so for Ross, the cosmic creation event has to be the singularity, right? Like that's what he thinks the beginning was. Well, even if inflation happened, if we had gravitational waves from inflation, that still wouldn't be data directly from what he takes to be the cosmic creation event because it's not; those gravitational waves are not from the singularity. Now, I think everything that Phil said was right. I would present the problem though in a little bit of a different sort of way because I think there's sort of two layers of the problem here. So on the one hand, there's just the fact that what Ross said is false, but then on the other hand, what Ross said didn't justify his conclusion either. So that's the other layer here, which is we don't actually know how far back physical reality extends, and even if we did know that, we also wouldn't know what fraction of physical reality is comprised by the observable universe. So Ross says that we see all of cosmic history, and that's not correct because, or at least, we don't have any justification for that claim, even if we could see back to the Big Bang, because we wouldn't know what fraction of the universe or the physical reality as a whole is comprised by the observable universe. But as Phil's already pointed out, it's even if you could make the argument work, the argument just isn't correct. So it falters in both those ways, and it's kind of astonishing that a professional academic, or someone who claims to be a professional academic, would make that kind of argument.
Yeah. Alex, any thought? Does this justify the question? This person's asked this question. I mean, if that person's really real, did he really sit on this airplane? Why is the universe so old?
No, so I was getting strong John Lennox flashbacks when I was watching this clip as well. It wasn't quite the John Lennox style. Lennox is more like he'll try and say that he was in a room full of people and he said a joke and it was really funny and everybody laughed. And that's his story. And you just no way of knowing if that's true. It just sounds like him boasting or whatever. It wasn't quite like that. But I mean, I kind of assumed at the end of the story, maybe it was in part that didn't make it into the clip or something, was that the quantum physicist, then said, oh yeah, I believe in Jesus now or something after this explanation. I assume that's where it was going as a story. But the thing is that there was one really crucial bit that goes almost unnoticed right at the beginning when he's setting it up, right? So the atheist quantum physicist on the plane asks him, if God exists, how come he spent 13.8 billion years, basically doing nothing before Jesus came about, right? And that does seem like a waste of time, and because then the thought would just be, God could just do it a different way, where why isn't it the 6,000-year-old, young Earth creation story? That makes more sense if you believe in God. It doesn't make much sense that he has 13.8 billion years of nothing happening. So reasonable question. But then Ross's reply was well, you see, because given the laws of physics that God chose, and then everything else follows from that antecedent assumption, but why didn't he just choose different ones? Why didn't he do it differently? It doesn't explain anything to say, because of this thing that I'm going to give you no reason to understand why that happened. If you accept that, this seems to me the best you can possibly do with his argument, is that you just unquestioningly accept that first assumption and you think everything else follows logically from that. But it's just the mystery hasn't been solved because there's just this big mysterious thing in the first place. Why did he pick those laws of physics? You just restate the question. How come God chose laws of physics such that there'd be 13.8 billion years of nothingness happening? Right? It's so doesn't even scratch the surface of the question. So for me, that was the kind of the bait and switch there, that he couldn't possibly explain to you why God chose those laws. And in fact, that's just the same question that he was supposed to be answering anyway. So all he's done is repackage the question and set it back to him. It was, infuriating, really was.
Yeah, and also Hugh Ross doesn't believe that there's a natural formation to life. He thinks abiogenesis is impossible and requires a miracle. So what on earth is this? What's the relevance then of all this cosmic history? If God's going to create life via a miracle, how on earth? It's I'm going to pretend to be a deist for this bit of the question. But then when you're not looking, I'm a theist, who demands that, God is continually intervening. Well, not continually intervening, but at least intervening.
So he could say, God wanted to show us the full expanse of cosmic history, right? But, what would be a better way to show us the whole creation of the whole expanse of cosmic history? To, have handed ancient Israelites an astrophysics textbook. I don't understand, the thing that's... So he could turn around and say, look, the reason why God didn't create life earlier was because then this full expanse of cosmic history wouldn't be visible to us. Now, of course, it's not visible to us, but supposing that
that like that was the explanation for why we're here as opposed to back there. Well, God reveals tons of things according to him to us through a book. So why can't God just show up in ancient, create our planet with us very early on in cosmic history, hand Adam and Eve a telescope and an astrophysics textbook and like remedial courses in differential geometry, and then just say like, well, there you go. There's the whole thing.
And also, it seems to me that it doesn't really resolve anything because, like, well, for a start, I don't think that the hypothesis that there's a God doesn't either raise or lower my expectation that the universe would be old rather than young. It just has nothing to do with big rather than small or whatever. It's got like the hypothesis has nothing to say about the like shape of the universe, right? Well, why would it? And I was going to say something else, and now I can't remember what it was. So I guess I'll stop talking. I had a really good point.
Well, maybe.
So.
Well, maybe we can leave that as a mystery, and that Alex will remember what he says.
I remember what it is.
Go on. Mystery solved. Go ahead.
But it's just that, like, okay, yeah, you might. He says, oh, God wanted us to sort of see all the way back to the beginning, because that's like that's better. It reduces some mystery. We can see the glory of His creation or something. But like, it doesn't really matter how far back you go. At some point, you have to stop. Like, we can't see everything, right? So there's still going to be this like impenetrable wall of mystery. So what if you can go back to 1 trillionth of a second before the Big Bang? How did he do the Big Bang? Right? You can never know that because it's going to be beyond the timescale that you can rewind to. Like, what did he do to make the Big Bang happen? You'll never know that. There's all of this mystery. It doesn't really make any difference. It doesn't barely chips away the sides of the mystery to say, oh, he shows you back, a certain amount of time. Right? If I have like a corridor and it gets dark and I can't see very far down it, it doesn't help. It doesn't really make any difference. If the corridor is really long and then it gets dark and I can't see what's in it, I still can't see what's at the end of it. Like, so what, right? It's not, you're not illuminating anything. You might be illuminating some corridor, but you're not helping me understand what's going on. Like, that kind of sense of illumination isn't being furthered. So I just think, again, we've just got this, well, we just happen to have found now that the universe is this old, so it must be that there's some good reason why it's 50. I mean, that must be that the Jesus I believe in wanted that exact thing to happen. So it's just the same thing again, it seems to me.
Yeah. All right, I think we should wrap it up there unless you got any last points to make. But let's wrap it up there. For anyone who made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. If you've got suggestions for future shows, please put them in the comments and please let us know what your thoughts are in the comments. And we will see you next time on the Sci-Fi Show.